Meritocracy, Under Assault, and Go Woke or Go Broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. And we have also with us Brian Chisholm and Matt Morgan. They both are members of the Maryland House of Delegates in this state, the bluest state in the country. Maybe, I'm not really sure. Anyway, this podcast is called Meritocracy Under Assault. And why is it under assault? Well, it's under assault, of course, because of all of the wokeness and the need for equity and not equality. And there's actually a book review in the Wall Street Journal that I just want to talk about briefly to set this up, this conversation with Matt Morgan and Brian Chisholm. And the book is called The Aristocracy of Talent, and it's by Adrian Wolfson. And the Wall Street Journal does a review on this, and the review says, the book is an effort to respond to the backlash of a meritocracy. Although Mr. Wooldridge, who is by the way, is the writer, he's an editor and columnist at The Economist and also wrote this book. He makes a strong case for practical and moral value of meritocracy while acknowledging its flaws. He doesn't fully confront what might be its most disturbing challenge today, doubts about just what merit is or what merit even exists. Well, that's obviously a problem if you can't even define it. He says, the idea of meritocracy is not new. Of course, Mr. Wooldridge dates it to ancient Greece and Plato's utopian vision of a governing class of carefully educated philosopher kings. I kind of remember that back in the day in college. Imperial China developed an extensive examination state, he writes, to identify the most talented citizens throughout the country and bring them to the emperor's court as mandarins. Liberal thinking about the rights of individuals and the oppressive character of the ancient regime helped fuel the spread of meritocracy in Europe after the Enlightenment. Rapidly in France and more gradually in Britain and elsewhere, confidence in the traditional patronage dispensing elites of landowners and nobles collapsed. This shift in outlook, as Mr. Wooldridge shows, led to reforms in schooling, in government, in business, and in the military. It was in the United States, Mr. Wooldridge says, that meritocracy had the strongest appeal. In an 1813 letter to John Adams, Thomas Jefferson distinguished between two types of aristocracies, an artificial one founded on wealth and birth, and a natural one rooted in virtue and talents. He argued that the Constitution enabled Americans to separate the two and enjoy the benefits of the second. The natural aristocracy, which was well suited to the instruction, the trusts, and government of society. With the important exception of race, the United States developed, in Mr. Wooldridge's phrase, as a republic of merit. That's how we developed. So that's just a brief excerpt from the book review in the Wall Street Journal about aristocracy versus meritocracy. And this particular podcast, we brought in Brian Chisholm and Matt Morgan to discuss whether meritocracy in the United States is under assault. So let's first define what that is for our listeners and viewers. Meritocracy is the idea that you live in a society and there's kind of a compact, there is a compact in your society whereby everyone agrees that you don't get promoted and you don't get to move up in society until you show the work that's necessary to get there. So here's an example. You go work for an employer, and the employer has, let's say, 10 employees. One of the employees thinks that they should be promoted simply because they have a higher education, let's say a master's degree, and you have a bachelor's of arts degree. And that employee thinks, well, they don't have to work as hard because they have a degree that's higher than yours. But you work harder. You work 6 days a week. You work 9 hours a day instead of the 6 hours a day that employee works. You demonstrate that you can generate more revenue and more buzz for the company, so you get promoted. That's merit. And that is very different, of course, from, in my opinion, what we're seeing today, which is so many people at Ivy Leagues, as an example, Matt, where you go to an Ivy League and it's like, well, I went to Harvard and therefore I should automatically work for the JP Morgan, on Wall Street, and I should be making, 6 figures, maybe more than that, maybe 7 figures a year as soon as I get out of college because I've got the right last name and the right pedigree. And increasingly, that's what we're seeing.
Yes, that's increasingly what we're seeing. It's not, people aren't being hired or not being recruited based on merit. They're being recruited based on their bloodlines. And this really cuts at the heart of the foundation of America, right? I mean, America is a place where you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It doesn't make a difference. It's
but that's
who
what
your mom and dad
But
were.
that's what we were taught. We were
Right.
taught that. I know that you were taught that. And I want you to finish your thought. I know that I was taught that. And God, I know Brian's father taught him that because we all have met each other as parents. But what's fascinating is, do you think that exists now?
No, I don't. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a large portion of the country, maybe about 49% by the last presidential election, that actually believes that. But there's a growing number of people that believe that, you should be rewarded based on your skin color, which sounds terribly perverse. Something like maybe from what the Klan used to believe.
That's exactly right. And I think Mark hit it on the head with the key word is work. It really is. We should all applaud work. Nowadays, it's almost frowned upon. They look at work as a bad thing. And, America's always been the land of opportunity. And I tell people all the time, there's opportunity everywhere, but most people don't recognize it because it's usually dressed in overalls and looks a lot like hard work. So people don't want to do the necessary steps. Nobody's really successful unless you're willing to put the work in. And we should all be measured upon our results, not measured upon our skin color or our ethnic background. And that's what MLK Jr. fought against. He said, I want you to judge me on my character and my results, not on the color of my skin. And now we're going backwards again. And because you're a certain color or a certain gender or a certain unknown gender, we're supposed to automatically have you elevate. But that doesn't help society. It doesn't even help the person you think you're elevating.
There's also a blue collar part of this this particular conversation too, namely that my father, blue collar guy, and was basically a car mechanic and also a body and fender man. That's, for those of you out there in podcast land, a body and fender man is someone that you go to when your car gets into an auto accident and he fixes your car and makes it look the way it did, at least prior to the accident. As you can imagine, that's hard work. It's dirty work, and it can be very uncomfortable work. It's very hard on your body. Well, my father didn't have a college education and then ended up opening up his own company and did extraordinarily well as a result of it. Now, today, for some reason, blue collar work is frowned upon, and it's considered to be meritless because it's like, oh, well, you didn't go to college. Oh, I mean, you're a plumber. Well, that's not very cool. Well, I got news for you. The last house that I had, my neighbor was a plumber, and his house was a lot nicer than mine, just for the record. So
all the trades are frowned upon now, and I can't believe your son or daughter they're not going to college, and they're going straight into a trade. But those people are, and it's funny, and I can't cite the article, but it was done in Fortune magazine a few years ago, and they measured a 30-year measure of people, the top 10% of people with higher education against top 10% of people without a college education. And the top 10% without a college education far exceeded the ones with college education because they got a little grit in their gut. They got a little fight in their belly. And they, number one, are not starting out with this huge debt. Nowadays, the average college is $50,000 per year. So you're $200,000 in the hole. Whereas the kid that went out and wanted to strap up his boots and go to work and work a real dirty job, but start to make money right off the bat, has far exceeded some of these guys. And they get out of college and they feel like they're the smartest one in the room, but they can't solve a problem.
And what's interesting about this, Brian, and I'll go to Matt, is what's interesting about this conversation is our parents taught our generation, and they taught us. By our generation, I mean baby boomers. And I have also taught my kids, which are all millennials, the idea, which is what you said. You work hard, you really apply yourself, and you demonstrate that you want it more than the next person, and you will succeed. Yet in modern 21st century America, what we're being told by the left is that no longer matters. And the reason why you got what you got is for some other reason other than the hard work. It had to have been by the way you look or by your religion or by the fact that you're straight or it had to be something else. It couldn't. And that is classic Marxism, by the way. You separate the individual from their work. And therefore, if you're able to do that, then you can separate them from their property.
Well, this has been an attitude by the ruling class for quite some time. I remember former President Barack Obama. Well, you didn't build that. That's somebody else doing that.
That's a great reference. That's so true.
And that's where they are at right now. And it's unfortunate because it's, not everybody lives their life perfectly according to our ruling class. Some people might start college a little late. Some people might go right into the workforce. Different strokes for different folks. And ultimately, unless you have that ability and opportunity to get ahead, to pull yourself up, that's really what made our country so much different than the rest of the world. It wasn't about who your mommy and daddy were. It was about you could do it on your own. It's about individualism. And you didn't have to have the perfect education. If you were willing to work hard and make some good decisions, you could get ahead and live a really, really good life here. And they're taking that away one step at a time. And that's very concerning.
And it is concerning. It's a great point, Matt. And this is what makes us blue collar Republicans, of course, because we actually cherish those values and the values of merit, which is why we're talking about this idea of merit and why it's so important for us to maintain this meritocracy in our country and reward people accordingly, rather than for some other ephemeral reason. But what's interesting is that there are also groups of people in the Republican Party, to be fair, and they are what I call the country club Republicans, who also believe that they should be given things by virtue of the fact that they went to Harvard or they went to Yale or they went to Georgetown. And then on the Democrat side, of course, it's just a complete mess because they don't value the blue collar people at all. What they're saying to people who are blue collar is, you are not successful because you didn't go to college, or you would have been a lot more successful if you did. And it was those bad Republicans that prevented you from doing so, rather than the way we were raised, which is, and the way I believe, by the way, which is, you know why you should be a plumber? Because you genuinely enjoy that trade. And that was like what my father always told me. And I bet you guys got the same speech from your parents, which is, choose the thing that you love and you will succeed beyond your wildest dreams. Choose the thing instead that's all about money, and you will never be happy or successful. And Democrats hate that. They hate that conversation.
Well, they're definitely unhappy. We know that.
Yeah.
Because they're very, very angry right now.
Anytime you change your sex, you are really an unhappy person. Yeah. Okay. And that seems to be really exclusively on the Democrat side. Just saying.
Yeah. The thing that's amazing to me is when Matt was talking, I thought about this.
They're not touching that podcast, listeners. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Just flip a coin.
A lot of times it really doesn't matter.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah. It really doesn't matter about your color, your parents, or where you're born, because you'll see families sometimes where one of the siblings will just excel and be the most successful person in the world. And then the brothers and sisters are failures. And a lot of times it's just got to do with production. And it's got to do with, this is what I always tell my son. I go, whatever you do in life, look to fill the need of somebody else. If you can figure out how to do that, you're always going to be successful.
That's the basis of capitalism right there. Exactly. Is filling the need, a service and product. There's nothing more moral than capitalism, where you're going through your own voluntary, you're providing a service that somebody else's need. You're not forcing them to buy the product or the service.
Certainly free market, because we were told, by the way, Matt, by many people, and podcast listeners who find this interesting, is apparently the RNC polled this and they said, don't use the word capitalism, use the term free market. And it's like, yeah, but, capitalism is about free markets. And obviously you have checks and balances with government. But nonetheless,
I want to explore it a little bit. Do you think, this is so prevalent in academia, do you think they're doing it because they're jealous?
Yes. They're really jealous.
I think they're doing it because they're sad that they're paying their plumber twice of what they earn.
Yeah.
They're like, I have a college degree. Don't you know how I have a degree in political science.
That's right.
Which means basically nothing. But I think it's jealousy and revenge is the
Are you
causing
saying that's
factor.
A useless degree? I would tend to agree that's useless as a degree.
The fast food workers are making a good bit more money.
We know.
Political science majors.
My father has this great, and Brian reminds me, like a younger version in many ways, because he always has these like one-liners, which are really hysterically funny. But I remember working at my father's shop, okay, all through childhood. And I would do the grunt work, sweep it out and wash a car and tape up the car before it got painted, those kinds of things. I learned the trade. Wasn't any good at it, but I learned it. Yeah. And people would come to him and they would say, you know what, Bob? Because my father's name is Bob. They said, you know what, Bob? You're awfully lucky to have this place. And my father had the best response ever, always. And it was always the same. He goes, well, you know what I found out? The harder I work, the luckier I get.
Right. That's exactly right.
Here's a man without a college education who just said it so well. Yeah. And this is what we should be saying to the Democrat Party. You know why I'm successful? You know why I'm so lucky to have what I have? It's not because I'm white. It's because I find that when I work 7 days a week and you only work 3, I tend to have more than you.
Well, we need to be saying that to the younger generation, really. I mean, action beats inaction every single time.
Well, harder work creates more opportunity. It's just a fact. And we always hear, well, there's not enough opportunity in this area. There's not enough opportunity in that area. Well, you'll find if you start to work, opportunities will start to present themselves. And that's what your father was speaking about. My dad was a bricklayer. And I learned to carry bricks early on. I learned how to
hard work.
Yeah, how to carry my. I would tell you, you're talking about what you learned at a young age. If you're on a site with a bunch of bricklayers, you're learning more than what your dad probably wants you to know.
Yes,
but
you learned a lot.
You learned a lot about life.
Well, there's definitely creators of circumstances.
Explains a lot about you right now, Brian.
There's definitely creators of circumstances and creatures of circumstances, and unfortunately, a lot of our younger, maybe not our viewers or people listening, but they seem to be just listening to the professors and they're limited based on their genetics or their sexuality or skin color. And that's just simply not true.
And that's also what makes you less successful, which is what you're saying. It's oh, well, because I'm trans, that's why I'm not successful and so forth. It's
you're not a victim.
Yeah, you're not a victim. I'm pretty sure that's something that you could correct. It's kind of self-correcting.
I think one of the things that's always missed is, and we just went through this with COVID, there's a fear of failure. We all understand you're going to fail, and it's only a failure if you let it keep you down. So I think the left a lot of times is trying to create this environment where nobody fails.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Hence the grades, so everybody gets C's, so nobody's hurt. There's no failures in here. And then what you'll find is, well, then nobody's working. We all know as successful Americans, you're going to fail. You just got to keep moving forward. Keep moving forward.
There's no undefeated entrepreneur.
That's exactly right.
That's right. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but in your lifetime so far, have you learned far more from your failures? Because I know I have.
Oh, yeah.
Right? When I failed, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Exactly right.
But
you
can't
can't be petrified to do it.
If I were a Democrat, what would I say? It's your fault that I did that.
Yeah, we all know how to accept responsibility, correct?
Right.
So
right.
they're trying to. There's nobody fails, no responsibility. Now we're all screwed.
It's true. So get this: in the Daily Wire, the Biden administration expands tuition breaks for future teachers, namely people that want to become teachers, so they want to go to college. So he's expanding tuition breaks for them, but he's doing it by removing the GPA requirement to provide access to students of color. So I'm going to read this. It says, the Biden administration announced a plan to expand tuition breaks for future teachers and remove GPA requirements for grant recipients in hopes of providing access to students of color. The Department of Education oversees the Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education grant program. So that's a program I didn't even know existed, that you can get free money from to go become a teacher, to go to college, so they'll help you pay for it, which provides tuition breaks for students obtaining degrees in education who commit to teaching in high-need fields and underserved schools for 4 years after graduation. The Biden administration, with the support of Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, announced that the annual grant amount for third and fourth year students, will double to $8,000 per recipient. Biden's plan will remove the existing GPA requirements for those recipients in hopes of increasing access to students of color. So, Matt and Brian, what we're saying here what the Biden administration is saying, what the Democrats are saying is what Miguel Cardona is saying, Secretary of Education of the United States. The Democrat Party is saying that by virtue of the color of your skin, that you are incapable of working hard and getting good grades to obtain this scholarship. Is that what they're saying? Because that's literally what they're acknowledging. And this goes to meritocracy, right? Which is, we're saying to people that we're going to water down standards so are you going to have better students eventually that go to college and they get a degree and they teach, K to 12, and they go there and they're not really educated, or they're terrible students, they're not good teachers. I mean, this is what bothers me, because I just feel like, and I know that this is a touchy subject, okay? But it used to be that we were going to give people of color certain breaks, like tax breaks, so that they could start businesses. I'll be frank with you. I was supportive of that. All right. Years ago, I was very supportive of that and actually voted for stuff like that. But now, fast forward, we're saying in the 21st century, by virtue of the color of your skin, you are not smart enough to get a good grade point average.
Well, that's soft bigotry of low expectations.
Exactly right.
It's also racism by the Democrat Party.
It is by racism, but I mean,
They're
nobody knows racism better than the Democratic Party. They created it. Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you're a parent sitting in the classroom, and then if your son or daughter has a black teacher, you're like, are they here because of their skin color, or are they here because they actually performed? And then imagine the teachers that you have now currently that may be African American. Like, you're kind of taking away from them.
You're creating more division, because that is going to be in the back of people's minds, which of course is a problem, right? But this is the Democrat Party, as you just said, Matt. They don't succeed unless they continue to perpetuate this idea that people, by virtue of the color of their skin, aren't as smart as others. That's insane. That's insane. Of course, they're as smart
something
as
right from
else.
the KKK, I believe. I'm all for diversity, but when you're talking about diversity at the sake of hiring people that are more qualified, that just seems un-American in many ways, and it's not fair for the person's spot that you're taking.
That's exactly right.
But this goes to the whole the meritocracy argument, and to the podcast listeners who I know really will find this interesting, Brian, and that is, at what point do we start speaking up? Because I know I have, and I know that you guys have, and so have others, but so few Democrats and independents and Republicans who know this is wrong. They know this is wrong, are fearful of speaking up, because if they do, they could maybe lose their job. And whether it's a job in corporate America or a small, medium-sized corporation, if they were to speak up about that, because they could say, well, boss, why are you promoting that person? We decided that it's only fair because even though you work harder, and even though you put in the time, and even though you've been here longer, we're trying to create, a system of equity.
I think one of the interesting dynamics of it all is, if you talk to some teachers, there's a lot of more conservative Republican teachers than most people will tell you. The real liberals are at the higher end, but you'll have some Republican conservative teachers, and they'll come to you and say, I'm afraid to say anything at all. So people are shunned, and they're almost like frowned upon and mocked. And so you get to the point, it's almost like a turtle. When you have a turtle and he's got his head out and you go over the first time, he puts his head back, but then comes back. And then you do it again, he puts his head back and comes back a little bit. And sooner or later, the head stops coming out because the turtle's like, I'm tired of being, poked at. And that's really a microcosm of society.
For me personally, I like the Mr. Miyagi metaphor better. Let's hear that one again. So let's hear the Mr. Miyagi.
Left side of the road, okay. Right side of the road, okay. Middle of the road, squish it like a grape.
Okay, so that was from the Karate Kid podcast.
It had nothing to do with me.
So get this. Speaking of equity, and speaking of what's happening in America with respect to the meritocracy, a BLM chapter declares the U.S. flag a hate symbol and denounces those who fly the United States flag as unsafe, racist, and stupid. So the Utah chapter of Black Lives Matter condemned those who display the American flag, which they described as a symbol of hatred. When we Black Americans see this flag, we know the person flying it is not safe to be around, the post read. When we see this flag, we know the person flying it is a racist. When we see this flag, we know the person flying it lives in a different America than we do. When we see this flag, we question your intelligence. We know to avoid you. It is a symbol of hatred. So there's actually one part of this statement that I think is somewhat true, and that is when we see this flag, we know that the person flying it lives in a different America than we do. And I think that to the extent that if you are Black and you live in an inner city, what you should really be asking yourself is, yeah, I'm sure your experience in that inner city is different from the suburbs. Why is where you live so awful? Because who's running it? Ask that question. Who's actually running that city? Who's in charge and who has been in charge for generations? And you haven't gotten any better in your life because it's unsafe. The schools are terrible. I mean, just go on and on and on. And
this is the next step. We were just talking about how they shun people. So now they're gonna try to mock people with the American flag. And I don't know if you guys saw, but George Foreman was in the news this past week because they've been telling George Foreman to stop putting "I love the United States" or the American flag, because he did it on the 4th of July on his tweets. And he said it correctly. He said, this country is giving me more than any other country could ever give me. This country feeds more people than any other country in
That's
the world.
because he sold so many Foreman grills.
Well, and it's funny because I was talking to a young man in my gym, and I go, you do know that George Foreman was a boxer? And he goes, well, he doesn't have anything to do with the grills, right? And I was like, no, that is his grills too. I mean, George Foreman is old, but I didn't know he was that old. They had no idea that he used to be a boxer. He probably made more money on the grills.
He's very thankful for the opportunities that he has given, and he's really taken advantage of those opportunities in a good way. Namely, he had this God-given gift of literally being able to beat the heck out of anybody.
And worked hard.
And worked really hard at it and succeeded and made millions of dollars doing so. And then transitioned into the Foreman Grill business, which apparently is also a very successful business.
But if they're successful at us now shaming the American flag and taking it down, then once again, we don't have borders. We don't have a symbol that we all unite under. And then we're all divided.
Oh, absolutely.
Are we even a country anymore? And that's their ultimate goal, is to remake America into the image they want. And so no GPAs, no flags, no borders.
Well, we want to remake America into something they control even further.
Right.
Yeah, no merit, because and that's the conversation here, is you get rid of merit, and then you get rid of any kind of reward system, because then you say, of course, Matt, you can't be successful in the real estate business because of the fact that you sold houses. It had to have been for some reason other than the hard work. And this person over here should be given some of the money that you have earned. And I know we've talked about this many different times in the podcast, but what's really different is, and I enjoy this too. It's one thing I really enjoy is going to Eagle Scout ceremonies, because you go to an Eagle Scout ceremony and they have all these badges and they have to actually earn them. They actually have to do something to earn each badge, and it's called a merit system. And that was always very reflective of America, and still is, I think. It's just that for some reason, we need to figure out how to get that back and restore that ideal that hard work should be rewarded and that laziness shouldn't.
Well, again, I think they do it out of revenge. I mean, this is to penalize one group of people for their political beliefs, or their support of the country, and they see you as opposition, and they're going to do everything to squash you. It's, all their policies revolve around one word to me, and it's just revenge.
Revenge. It's true. It's classic Marxism. So Matt, what would you do if someone came up to you and said, I'm triggered by the American flag that you're flying on your property. I think it's racist. And I think it's also, a form of white supremacy. What would you say?
You need to go back and learn some history over again, because no other country in the world.
No, you wouldn't say that.
Oh,
you would get really mad. You would say something different. I'm pretty sure.
I'm more measured nowadays, But no other country in the world has done more to fight racism than America. I mean, we are a mixed race society and have done more to overcome racism than any other country in the world. So I'd probably ask the college goer talking about my flag, and just simply, hey, can you pick some other place in the world where you might be better off at, and maybe even offer them to buy them a ticket there as long as they promise they can come back.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting conversation. So what would you say?
I'd say that there's still, and as messed up as the thinking is, there are still people dying, risking their lives to get across the border into this country because they recognize the opportunity that's there.
You mean they're fleeing free health care and free education for the horrors of capitalism?
The beauty of fighting a dog for your last chicken bone down in Venezuela. They're fleeing that. But as far as the American flag goes, and I don't know if you guys, and I just popped in my head when you were just speaking. So Biden's got a task force out now that they're going to start to go around the country knocking on doors to find out if you've been vaccinated. It's a soft feel, they're just going to give you your options, but they want to know. And you know what they're really looking for? They're looking for that optic of, we're going to knock on this guy's door. He's going to say he's not getting the vaccine. He's against it. And they want that American flag flying in the back because they think the people that aren't getting the vaccine are Trump voters or patriotic Americans, and they're the evil bad people. So they're always trying to paint this picture. And that's what I believe they're trying to do is anybody with an American flag. And it was nice to see this 4th of July. There was no Republican Democrat parade that I was in, but when you're walking, people had the American flag on. And I think that scares the left and the liberals that we recognize the fact that life only asks for measurable progress. And Jim Rome was my favorite motivational speaker. He'd say, life asks for measurable progress. That's why they make those second grade chairs so small. You're not supposed to stay there forever.
So get this, podcast listeners. We have a Go Woke or Go Broke segment in this podcast. You're going to love this. So get this. We're going to call it the Woke Cemetery. The place where you get buried. It's the Woke Cemetery. Solar farms in graveyards. Yes. So WBUR, which is Boston's NPR news station, it's one of those publicly funded news stations. They have an article and it says there's a rise in cremations. And that rise in cremations in the US opens unused cemetery space to new solar projects. Fewer families are choosing burials for deceased loved ones and opting instead for cremation. It's a funerary trend that is helping to forge a link between the Catholic Church and the solar industry. If you picture a solar field, what do you see? Probably a large open space, flat and dry without too many trees and with lots of sunlight. Now think about a cemetery. Swap out those solar panels for gravestones, and the locations suddenly have a lot in common. So why not combine the two? Well, apparently that's a trend in Boston. The only thing is that this writer got wrong is that if you see a field that's an open space and it's like a beautiful meadow and you cover it up in solar panels, it's not a beautiful space anymore and it's not a meadow. You just ruined the environment. But in a cemetery,
but you don't care because you're dead.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking. They do have a lot in common.
Just like peanut butter and jelly.
Two things that aren't really producing anything. Either a dead body or a solar panel.
But what makes us woke is that you're going to have instead of a headstone, I guess you're going to have a solar panel there, and it's going to be wired. I mean, where are they going to put the wires?
I can't wait to hear the tax credit for this.
Yeah. Well, the liberals. The liberals actually created this problem because Matt and I are both on health and government operations, and I had a long talk with the mortuary director. He said, because of COVID, we're still charging $10,000 or $15,000, but you couldn't have more than 3 or 4 people. So everybody's suddenly decided, well, you know what? I'm not paying $15,000 for me and one other person to see Grandma Annie be buried. Let's just send her to cremation. So I don't know if that trend will change.
It's always odd when we hear those hearings like that because we turn the air conditioning down in the committee room, really cold.
Well, I think also, and this is Massachusetts, but I'm pretty sure in New York they probably have a lot of unused space as well because Cuomo killed so many elderly people with COVID that they probably were cremated because I guess my understanding is once you pass with COVID, there's still a short period of time you can catch it or something like that. Is that true? I don't know.
I would think so.
I don't know. I don't have.
It sounds reasonable.
I don't know for sure, but I think what they did was they wanted to dispose of the bodies pretty quickly, and they did so by through cremation, which now you have all these spaces. But look, what I'm saying here is this is definitely go woke or go broke, because the solar companies are going, hey, we want subsidies to be able to put these things in graveyards too, because, that's much more environmentally sound than putting it on top of a roof somewhere. And it's also just cool. I mean, it shows you, in my opinion, I think they're sick, because I don't think solar panels belong in graveyards, right? It's a graveyard, right? You're supposed to, it's a place where you go to honor the dead. And then suddenly you have this empty space on one part of the graveyard.
Their new religion's climate change.
That's good.
I mean,
that's good.
They don't really care about the respect.
So they can go to the graveyard and basically honor climate change, and that's their religion. And right, say, oh my God, climate change. We've got solar panels in the graveyard.
We like to put the cross up, and they want to put solar panels up. It's about the same.
So another thing, part of this go woke or go broke, is an article in Morning Star. Can solar installations help foster biodiversity? And it says, reports on how a new solar park in Sacramento County, California, not only produces clean energy, but also creates habitats for pollinator species. At the end of the last year, workers in Sacramento County, California, completed construction of a 16.5 megawatt solar park on what was once open ranch land. In December, the Rio Linda Solar Farm began producing enough energy to power 2,600 homes annually. Of course, unless it was raining or cloudy. Usually, the ground underneath big solar installations is scraped and covered with gravel or low grass. But if you drive by this solar farm, you'll be treated to a more different view, an array of pollinator-friendly native plants and wildflowers like purple needlegrass and California poppy. Now, once again, podcast listeners, and Brian and Matt, this was a place where you had hundreds of acres of ranch land. And they've covered them up with solar panels, and they're going, but we've created a pollinator area. Well, how? You've covered it up with solar panels.
It just sounds like it's growing up with weeds.
Yeah.
And
it's solar panel with weeds.
But this is, to me, it's like very apropos to this podcast too, about meritocracy. Is like they're not the party of science, and the Democrats, and they also don't believe in meritocracy, because why in the heck would you believe in solar panels covering up ranch land?
Well, this is a public podcast, so I want this trademark before I say it. We're going to start to have solar artists, and this is solar art. So you might be able to get a degree in solar art here pretty soon. I can see it coming. Solar art with well, would it be solar landscaping, or solar art sounds better? I'm a solar artist. But
you can only get that if you're tall. That's part of the requirement. You're closer to the sun.
And you could also be you could be a grave digger, a solar artist, and a teacher.
Yeah, so the open field had lavender, and then they covered it up with solar panels. But because they left some of the lavender, between the rows of solar panels, but the other lavender is all dead because it's being covered and, burned up by the solar panels. Because they did that, it's pollinator friendly. It's much better than what used to be there because it has solar panels on it. I mean, this is just ridiculous stuff. Between that and the woke cemetery, putting solar farms in cemeteries. I mean, but I do like what Matt said. I think that I might steal that.
Religion.
It's a new religion, so let's put them in cemeteries.
Right. Can they pollinate in a cemetery?
Well, only if the solar panels are there.
Right. They can pollinate, they can propagate, they can do all kinds of things in there. So get this, podcast listeners. From Caucasian to Asian, transracial is a thing. So what is transracial? Well, the normal version of trans, as I always thought, was that it was a guy wanting to become a woman or a woman wanting to identify as a guy. And they either just dressed that way or they went through the whole surgical thing, right? And these two guys deal with this subject matter on their respective committees. So we don't want to get too much into the science part of it and the political part of it, other than the fact that there's a new trend and it's transracial, namely that you want to become a different race. So there's this guy in England, he's Caucasian because he's English, and he wants to become Korean. So what he did was he decided to get a whole bunch of surgeries. And one such surgery was to pull his eyes back so that he looked more Asian. And I guess in his view, more Korean. This was him, by the way. All right. This is what he wanted to do. So we have a series of clips on this, and we're going to have some fun with this subject. Here is clip number one.
So I am going to come out today and say that I've been transitioning. I've been very unhappy with who I am deep down for the last 8 years, and I've had like 18 plastic surgeries now, and I've just had a facelift, a brow lift, a temple lift, an eye surgery, a canthoplasty, and my teeth done as well. These are just part of my transition.
So he's had all of those surgeries. Did you hear that? He had his teeth done, and I'm not sure why that would make him, or what makes you more Asian with your teeth, but he had his eyes done, his temple done. I think he said his cheeks. What else did he say? It's like one other thing
because
there.
we brought it up earlier. I think his GPA automatically went up because he's Korean now.
Yeah.
Well, was he North Korean or South Korean?
If he's North Korean, he's got to get shorter. South Koreans are about a foot taller than North Koreans.
That's
Was it
true.
because
I
they're
heard that.
healthy?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right,
Because they're healthy because
they
of
get to eat.
capitalism.
That's right.
And then, maybe a schmeckel reduction. I'm not really sure what else was done there too.
Yeah, I mean, can you be?
We're not touching that.
No.
Well, I mean, what did he look like after the knife surgery? Like, can you be halfway through your transitioning?
It's
Like he went 18 surgeries. That's a lot.
That's
there.
a lot of surgeries. And by the way,
And
once
dental.
again, podcast listeners, he just wants to become Korean. He's Caucasian, right? So we went from men wanting to become women, women wanting to become men competing in women's sports, to now a guy who wants to become Korean because he's Caucasian, because he doesn't identify with his race.
So in his plan here, I got a lot of questions. I just love to interview this guy. Maybe bring him in here after this.
That'd be a great
because
podcast.
was it like one surgery and then decided to have another surgery and then another surgery? Or was this the plan from the beginning? Like, I'm going to have 18 surgeries and I'm going to identify as Korean at the end of this. I mean, does he need like a 19th or 20th? Because at some point, I got to feel if somebody walked into a doctor's office, there's a thing called moral hazard here from the medical professions, and I can't believe
That's
they
a good point.
even
Yeah.
took the time to actually do this. I kind of feel bad for this guy.
Yeah, what
He
doctor
obviously
would,
has
what
something
doctor would
wrong
take
with
this
him.
on? Yeah, I agree with you. There's a mental health issue without question. What kind of doctor? The doctor has a mental health issue too to allow this to happen.
Right. To keep performing these surgeries on this guy, he looks freakish.
So apparently,
And as we know, the doctors have a board that they're supposed to answer to. And this guy obviously sat down and said, we're going to start these surgeries here and we're just going to keep going. I mean, they have to oversee, somebody has to oversee this, because I think the doctor is definitely is complicit in this as the patient is. Because obviously he said,
Completely
I don't
agree.
like the way that I feel, the way he feels, which has nothing to do with his outward appearance. So I don't think he's ever going to be able to fill this void. And I think he should have been maybe referred to a mental specialist to begin with,
absolutely.
to see if he's really ever going to be
Yes.
able to.
Absolutely, he should have been. But the concerning part from a society point of view is like we're putting this guy out there and like, look, you can be, change, and it just has a bad impact, I think, on youth.
Right. You can
Just
be
sit there-
whatever race that you want to be, and you can get life-changing surgery to do it, I suppose. I mean, it's kind of gross. So,
So we have a magic man woman machine,
Yep.
and now we have a magic, race
race
changer
changer
machine.
Right.
Yes.
So nobody's really got a true identity.
That's right. So here's the next clip where this gentleman, this Englishman, says that he wants to be known by, I guess, Jimin, among other things, and kind of describes it a little bit more in detail. We have that clip, and here it is.
I'm feeling really good. For the first time in my life, I feel beautiful. I'm looking in the mirror and I love the way I look and feel happy. And I hope people can respect my decision. It's a very tough decision to come out this way. But I am coming out as non-binary. I don't feel I identify as male or female. I just feel like I'm just in the middle. And my pronouns are they, them, Korean, Jimin. Because I know a lot of people don't understand me, but I do identify as Korean. And I do look Korean now. I do feel Korean. I don't identify as British. So please don't refer to me, any media or anyone online, as British, because I identify as Korean. That's just my culture. That's my home country. That's exactly how I look now. And I also identify as Jimin. That's my Korean name. But
So Jimin is a Korean unisex name, and it's predominantly feminine in the Korean language. And Jimin is also a singer from the group BTS, which is a popular Korean boy band, which I think is probably where his real obsession lies. But he says he's non-binary on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's now Korean.
You got to get this person in here. To go through 18 surgeries because he has some K-Rock fantasy.
It's
K-Rock. It's unbelievable.
I need a cheat sheet of all these different things that he is because I am completely lost on this now. I mean, we were talking about this earlier.
He's never strong in the pronouns.
Yeah, exactly. We had Boy George when we were growing up. He was in Culture Club. And I don't think he had any surgeries. It was simple. He just put a little bit of makeup on, grew his hair long, and probably saved himself 18 surgeries. You have to figure, what, 10 grand a surgery?
But Boy George was not trying to become a different race. He was just maybe trying to be more kind of like a eunuch. He didn't really want to be associated with the guy or girl, because he always dressed that way. He calls himself Boy George, but he kind of looks like a girl, but he kind of looks like a boy. And that's his choice, right? He decided to do that. And by the way, he made a lot of money at it with his music. His music was very popular. But this is a little bit different because, how do you function when you go through society and you apply for a job and you're like, you check the box and it says, your race, and it's like,
that's why we got to get this guy for an interview. I want to see where does he work? Where's he planning on working? And this whole thing where he feels good about himself. And I need a before and after
at the demilitarized zone. He's going to work at the demilitarized zone in Korea.
This guy, he better have a lot of medical leave because he's obviously in the surgery room quite often. Who I'd like to see is his parents, Hey, he's doing well. 7 to 12 more surgeries, and he's going to be pretty good.
I want to ask him what school he went to, and did you go to the university system? What was the profound impact on your life that make you think this might be a good idea?
That's a really good point. And the thing is I was talking about this the other day. It's like, well, since this is a thing, transracial. So why can't Hunter Biden and Joe Biden become trans Chinese since they're bought and paid for by the Chinese? Can you just identify that way, or do you have to actually have the surgery?
If there's a paycheck involved in it, Hunter might be on board.
Yeah,
exactly. I think, then they bought and paid for.
Yeah, I think Hunter's been pretty close to the Chinese in several different ways, so he's halfway there.
Yeah,
but Hunter doesn't really.
He's a member of the boy band Chinese version, though, I guess. Yes. So why not have the military transition to Chinese? Because that's what the wokeness is going on in their military right now, which is to try to turn it into,
They're probably looking for volunteers now. We need a few good people that want to get through a lot of surgery.
Yeah. Sadly, with President Biden, you could probably wake him up tomorrow and tell him he's Chinese. He'd be all in. Oh, yeah, that's right.
I can't wait for him to go door to door. Is Biden going to administer the jab yourself?
You'd have to pull out the cue cards though when you did that. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what did my staff want me to do? Okay, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Of course, that's
they
what
told me not to talk too much.
Yeah, exactly.
But Matt brought this up. Wasn't there a former NAACP?
What was that lady? Richard
Dolezal.
Dolezal, right? Yeah, she
identified as black and was the head of the NAACP, but ended up
being
white.
Out, and then they kicked her out.
Yes.
That doesn't seem very woke.
But isn't it interesting?
That wasn't open-minded at all by them.
But BLM is supposed to believe in all this trans stuff. So she was transracial. So what's wrong with that? I guess it undermines their movement, doesn't it? It undermines their movement.
If anybody could be anything they want on any given day, I guess there's really no reason to have all the strife based on skin color.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Because we're all the same.
Yeah, exactly.
For whatever we feel like being, whatever pronoun, thee, them, Jim, and whatever.
Well, you have a lot of self-flagellating liberals and progressives who joined BLM as well. And they were, the white progressives I'm talking about. They joined, and you saw them in the streets rioting in 2020 and throughout that. So
if things are so easy for white America, why don't we have everybody just trans over to white?
That's a really good idea.
Everybody's now.
And that, it brings up a really good point about
but then that way, Elizabeth Warren wouldn't have gotten hired at
that's right.
At where? Harvard.
Yeah, Native American.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because she's Native American. Yeah. But Brian brought up a really good point, which is if this is a trend, this whole transracial thing, which I think it probably is, especially on the progressive left, then at what point will, maybe in the near future, we might not really have a race, right? It might be just like the human race, which is the way we all believe it to be now anyway as conservatives. And we stop looking at people in terms of their race, and BLM kind of dissipates because it's like, hey, your race never did matter. Only you thought it did, but it was really about political power and power over people more than it was about your race.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always been in the mortgage business as well, and you do the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, and they changed that with Dodd-Frank, and we went from Hispanic, non-Hispanic, and now there's 32 different categories of which you can mark, and pretty soon. So if we're going this trend, why do we have to put anything at all? And we knew why they were doing it, because they wanted to make sure certain lending institutions were not discriminating against certain ethnic backgrounds or certain. So
but the lender doesn't fill that out. The applicant fills that out.
Yeah, so they can put whatever they want. And as you know,
can you check multiple boxes?
Yeah. Well,
I want to check the box that gives me the lowest rate.
Exactly.
So look, that was Go Woke or Go Broke. So we do have a final segment in this podcast, and it's about the U.S. decline. So the podcast is about meritocracy under assault. And we do have this great article in the Wall Street Journal. And the journal has this article entitled, "Nixon Warned About the U.S. Decline. Half a century ago, he foretold the loss of American preeminence." We're going to discuss this in relation to the podcast subject, which is the lack of a meritocracy, or potentially a dying of meritocracy and the lack of merit. So I'm just going to read this real briefly. The U.S. has been through dark times before, and in living memory, 50 years ago this week, President Richard Nixon spoke frankly about America's doldrums in a speech that didn't get enough attention from the media, or at the time, historians. On the 6th of July, 1971, the 37th president addressed senior Western media executives in Kansas City, Missouri, amid racial unrest, campus agitation, and anti-war protests. So you remember that time, what had happened. The columns of the National Archives building in Washington reminded Nixon of ancient fallen empires. "I think of what happened to Greece and Rome, and you see what is left, only the pillars. What has happened, of course, is that the great civilizations of the past, as they have become wealthy, as they have lost their will to live, to improve, they have then become subject to decadence that eventually destroys the civilization," Nixon lamented. The United States is now reaching that period. So Nixon said that in 1971. And it goes on. He says, "The United States no longer is in the position of complete preeminence or predominance," he said in 71. "We now face a situation where four other powers, the Soviet Union, Western Europe, Japan, and China, have the ability to challenge us on every front. Yet this can be a constructive thing." A few months later, he told Time magazine, "I think it would be a safer world and a better world if we had a very strong and healthy United States." So Nixon, as the Cold Warrior, warned us in 71. And so fast forward, this says, Nixon's predictions about the end of U.S. global preeminence proved to be wrong, or so it seemed in the 5 years before his death in 1994. The Soviet Union collapsed. The U.S. enjoyed what Charles Krautheimer called the unipolar movement. Late in life, Nixon wrote books arguing the U.S. would dominate the world scene and it would shape the new era because we are the last remaining superpower, he declared in uncharacteristically sweeping terms. No crisis is irrelevant to our interests. And so here's what we're going to talk about. Today, China is rising, Russia is resurgent, and the U.S. is again consumed by division and self-doubt. Will the U.S. disprove this forecast of decline again, or was Nixon ahead of his time? And this is really worth discussing because, Nixon was very down in the dumps in 71 because of all of the university protests and the unrest in the country, both civil unrest and racial unrest, civil unrest from the Vietnam War, and then racial unrest because of so many racial inequities at that particular time that had to be addressed. And now, of course, fast forward, we have this challenge from China. And I guess that's the question. Is the U.S. in decline?
I think that Reagan said it best when he said, freedom, the loss of freedom is only one generation away. It's got to be fought for every day. And that's the concerning thing about our education system and the way that these kids are being taught now that America is bad. We understand that freedom is what feeds the world. Freedom is what gives opportunity to people. Capitalism and freedom allow people to flourish. And it's funny to me, the people that are out there complaining now are complaining on $1,000 phone. That is unimaginable to me. They have so much at their fingertips nowadays that they're now starting to measure themselves against other people and what they're telling them, not realizing all the gifts and all the great opportunities around them. And it's scary that they're now teaching these young kids that America is bad and not explaining to them, no, America is one of the greatest gifts ever known to the world. And it's not because of us as a country, it's because of the people and the freedom. So we have to start to make sure that we start at home by telling our kids, freedom is good, capitalism is good, America is good. But they're trying to beat back on this, and you see it every day. And I just think it's a battle between those that understand what we are as a country and those that want to transform us and bring us down.
Great point. So I think what I'm hearing you say is the U.S. is not in decline, but we have to fight to make sure that we renew it, to make sure that they don't succeed with getting rid of the meritocracy and merit and hard work.
There's certainly aspects and people in this country that cheer on our decline, that cheer on us going down. But I think that there's still a heartbeat and a soul of America that can't be driven out. At least now, and I'm hoping that fight stays in, and then we transfer that to the younger generation, and they understand, and that's why they want to take the history away. Because if you take away our history, then they get to define what our history was. Not that people fought to free people. I mean, we had 580,000 soldiers dead in the Civil War to provide freedom. And when people start to realize what a gift freedom is, then it's worth fighting for. But if we let them define what it is, then we could be in trouble. So I think we're not going to decline, but I think that it's certainly something that we need to continue to fight.
That was
for.
inspirational, Matt.
That was very inspirational.
I'm
pumped up now.
Nixon warned of his U.S. decline.
Well, Nixon did warn us, and if you think back during that time, I mean, with Ford as the presidency after that, and there was some significant decline, and there was even further decline under Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, there was stagflation.
Right. You couldn't have Ronald Reagan without Jimmy Carter. And then maybe that's just the cycle that we're in. History repeats itself, and I hope it repeats it that way, because I really think there's some opportunity. You know, American exceptionalism is an exceptional country. And there was a recent poll where saying the majority of young people aren't proud of our country. And that is so concerning, because you think about what would the rest of the world be if it wasn't for America being the moral guiding light for the rest of the world. You want to turn that over to China? You want to turn that over to the Soviet Union? I can tell you that China and the Soviet Union is not talking about transracial.
Yeah, they're not interested.
That's probably not a priority for them.
No, I would think that if you try to be transracial in China, they're probably going to put you with the Uyghur Muslims in a concentration camp. Just pretty sure that's what's going to. You'll be making iPhones.
They might want to keep that in the back of their mind.
Exactly.
Reagan, we were very good at beating the Soviet Union, Cold War. Unfortunately, we didn't beat the ideology. And now we find that ideology right on our doorsteps right now. The continued push towards socialism, which always involved in communism. The main difference between the two is, how much force are you willing to implement your agenda?
Yep.
It's very scary.
And that's the final word from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins, and to our guests, Brian Chisholm and Matt Morgan. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Rumble, Parler, and our website. See you next time.